The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Blue Ridge Shooting Range as Mei Chen pulled her 10-year-old sedan into an empty spot. She checked her watch 15 minutes early. Taking a deep breath, she studied her reflection in the rearview mirror, tucking a strand of graying hair behind her ear. At 46, Mei wasn't the type of person who sought out new experiences. The local library where she'd worked for 20 years was her comfort zone, surrounded by the familiar smell of books and the quiet hum of people reading. But everything had changed 6 months ago, when her husband Tom passed away suddenly. The house felt too empty now, her routines too hollow. The self-defense class was her neighbor Judy's idea. "You live alone now," Judy had said over tea one afternoon. "It wouldn't hurt to learn how to protect yourself." Mei grabbed her purse and the folder containing her registration paperwork. The weight of what she was about to do settled in her stomach like a stone. She had never even held a gun before. The inside of the shooting range smelled of metal, gunpowder, and something chemical she couldn't place. A group of about 15 people milled around the reception area, most of them men in their 30s and 40s. Many wore camouflage hats or tactical-looking clothing. Mei glanced down at her beige cardigan and sensible flats, suddenly feeling out of place. "First time?" asked the woman behind the counter, not unkindly, as Mei handed over her paperwork. "Is it that obvious?" Mei attempted a smile. "We get all types here. Just sign these waivers. Classroom's through that door. Beginner's handgun safety and shooting, right?" Mei nodded, quickly signing the forms with her neat librarian's handwriting. The classroom was arranged with folding chairs facing a whiteboard. Mei chose a seat in the back row, setting her notebook and pen on the small attached desk. She watched as others filtered in, greeting each other with easy familiarity. 2 women in their 30s entered together, laughing about something. They sat across the room from Mei, not noticing her quiet presence. The door at the front of the room opened with a bang, and a tall man with steel-gray hair and the rigid posture of someone who had spent years in uniform strode in. The room fell silent. "Morning, folks. I'm Doug Wilson, your instructor for the next 8 weeks. 26 years with the Sheriff's Department. Firearms instructor for 18 of those." His eyes scanned the room, taking inventory of each face. "Some of you I know from previous classes. For the newcomers," his gaze lingered momentarily on Mei. "Welcome to Blue Ridge. By the end of this course, you'll know how to safely handle, load, unload, and shoot a handgun with reasonable accuracy." Doug began calling roll. When he reached Chen Mei, she raised her hand slightly. A few heads turned as if noticing her for the first time. Doug simply nodded and continued. After roll call, Doug launched into a lecture about gun safety. Mei took detailed notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. While others occasionally asked questions or shared anecdotes, she remained focused on absorbing every word. An hour later, Doug announced they would move to the indoor range for a basic demonstration. "No live fire today," he said. "Just want to get you all familiar with the space and basic stance." The indoor range was louder than Mei expected, even with only a few people shooting in the public section. The class gathered in a separate area with 6 shooting lanes. The sharp smell of gunpowder was stronger here, making Mei's nose wrinkle. "Gather around," Doug said, motioning to a table where several handguns were laid out. "These are what you'll be working with throughout the course. Standard 9mm Glocks. Simple, reliable, good starter guns." As everyone crowded around the table, a latecomer burst through the door. Mei couldn't see past the wall of bodies in front of her, but she heard the newcomer's booming voice. "Sorry I'm late, Doug. Traffic was a nightmare." "Jack Brooks," Doug replied, his tone warmer than it had been all morning. "Wondered if you'd make it." "Class, this is Jack Brooks, former Army Ranger and one of the best shooters I've ever had the pleasure of teaching." The crowd parted, and Mei caught sight of a tall man in his 30s with broad shoulders and a confident grin. He wore a t-shirt with the logo of a local security company, his muscular arms covered in colorful tattoos. "Jack's actually going to be helping out with some demonstrations as we progress," Doug continued. "He's competed nationally." Jack nodded, accepting the introduction as if it were his due. His eyes swept over the class, briefly connecting with Mei's before moving on without recognition. Doug began demonstrating proper grip on one of the Glocks. Dominant hand high on the backstrap, support hand wrapped around, thumbs pointing forward. Mei strained to see past the taller people in front of her. After a moment, she gave up and moved to the edge of the group where she could get a better view. After the grip demonstration, Doug had everyone line up to practice stance. He positioned each person one by one, correcting feet placement and arm extension. When it was May's turn, he spent less than 10 seconds with her. Widen your stance a bit, arms straighter. And then he moved on to the next person. When Jack's turn came, Doug spent nearly 3 minutes discussing the finer points of his form, calling the attention of the entire class. See how Jack distributes his weight? Notice the slight bend in the knees, the forward lean? This is textbook, folks. Jack demonstrated a few dry fires, his movements smooth and practiced. Several people nodded appreciatively. One of the men asked a question about trigger pull, and soon Jack and Doug were deep in conversation about advanced techniques. The rest of the class momentarily forgotten. May practiced her stance quietly at the end of the line, trying to mimic what she had seen. Her arms began to tremble slightly from holding the position. You're locking your elbows too much. May turned to find an older man standing nearby. He wore the range's logo on his shirt and carried a broom. I'm sorry, she said, your elbows. You're locking them. Creates tension. Makes it harder to absorb recoil. He demonstrated with his own arms. Keep a slight bend like this. May adjusted her position. Thank you, mister. Just Ray, I clean up around here. He nodded toward where Doug and Jack were still talking. Don't worry about all that advanced stuff for now. Basics first. Always basics first. Before May could respond, Doug clapped his hands to regain everyone's attention. All right, let's assign lanes for next week when we'll actually be shooting. We'll rotate throughout the course, but starting positions matter. He began calling names and assigning positions. Jack unsurprisingly got lane 1 right next to where Doug would stand. The 2 women who came together were assigned lanes 2 and 3. The assignments continued until only May and one other man remained. Chen, lane 6. Peterson, lane 5. Doug pointed to the farthest positions. May nodded, not surprised. Lane 6 was the farthest from the instructor position, practically in the corner. Out of sight, out of mind. As the class wound down, people gathered in small groups chatting and exchanging phone numbers. Jack had drawn a crowd of admirers, both men and women, who listened intently as he told a story that involved lots of hand gestures. May packed her notebook away and headed for the door. As she passed the reception desk, she noticed Ray sweeping nearby. Thank you again for the advice, she said. Ray looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. You're welcome. Most folks don't notice the cleanup crew. I notice people who are helpful, May replied with a small smile. See you next week, Mrs. Chen? May, please. And yes, next week. She hesitated. Do you think someone like me can actually learn to shoot well? Ray leaned on his broom, studying her with pale blue eyes. Someone like you? I'm not exactly. She gestured toward where Jack stood holding court. Like them. Ray's face crinkled into a smile. Good, he said simply. As May walked to her car, she felt a strange mixture of doubt and determination. The class hadn't been what she expected. She'd felt invisible, overlooked. But there was something about the weight of the training gun in her hand, the challenge of learning something completely new. She looked back at the building. Through the window, she could see Jack demonstrating something to an attentive Doug. Next week, she whispered to herself, unlocking her car door. I'll be ready. The week passed slowly for May. Between shelving books and helping patrons find research materials, she found herself thinking about the shooting class more than she expected. Each night after dinner, she practiced the stance Ray had suggested using a hairbrush in place of a gun. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, arms extended with a gentle curve at the elbows. You look ridiculous, she told her reflection on Thursday night, but she kept practicing anyway. When Saturday morning arrived, May woke before her alarm. She dressed carefully in comfortable jeans and a plain blue button-up shirt, practical clothes that wouldn't restrict her movement. In her purse, she packed the small notebook where she'd written down everything she remembered from the first class, along with a few questions that had come to her during the week. The parking lot at Blue Ridge Shooting Range was more crowded than before. May recognized several cars from the previous week. As she walked toward the entrance, she spotted Jack Brooks leaning against a shiny black pickup truck, surrounded by 3 men from the class. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying across the lot. Jack glanced her way as she passed, but his eyes slid over her without recognition. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Today they would actually shoot for the first time. May checked in at the front desk where the same woman handed her a pair of protective earmuffs and safety glasses. Nervous? The woman asked. A little, May admitted. Don't worry, Doug's a good teacher. Just remember what he tells you about recoil. It surprises most beginners. May thanked her and headed to the classroom where Doug was already writing on the whiteboard. She chose the same seat as before in the back corner. Opening her notebook, she reviewed her notes while waiting for class to begin. Doug started with a 30-minute lecture on ammunition types and loading procedures. He passed around samples of different bullets, explaining the differences between them. When the 9mm round reached May, she was surprised by its weight. Such a small thing, yet so heavy with potential. Today we'll be shooting standard target rounds, Doug explained. Jack, want to demonstrate proper loading technique? Jack stepped forward confidently, taking the Glock that Doug offered. His hands moved with practiced ease as he inserted the magazine and chambered a round. May noticed how everyone leaned forward slightly, watching his every move. She found herself doing the same. After the demonstration, Doug announced they would move to the range. Remember your assigned lanes from last week. We'll rotate throughout the course, but for today, stick to your starting positions. The class filed into the range, which was empty of other shooters this morning. May made her way to lane 6 in the far corner. She could barely see Doug from her position, but she had a decent view of the others in the class. Doug walked around, placing a paper target and a box of ammunition at each station. When he reached May, he barely made eye contact. 20 rounds to start. Just focus on hitting the paper anywhere. Don't worry about the bullseye yet. He moved on before she could ask any of the questions she'd prepared. May stared at the box of ammunition, then at the unloaded Glock sitting on the small shelf in her lane. Her hands felt suddenly clumsy. She glanced down the line and saw that Jack was already helping one of the two women load her weapon. Their heads bent close together as he explained something that made her laugh. Taking a deep breath, May opened her box of ammunition and carefully picked up a bullet. She remembered what Doug and Jack had demonstrated, how the magazine loaded from the top, how much pressure it took to push each round down against the spring. With methodical precision, she loaded 10 rounds just as they had shown. Doug's voice carried down the line. Everyone get your earmuffs and safety glasses on. When I give the signal, you can begin firing. Take your time between shots. This isn't a race. May put on her protective gear. The earmuffs muffled the world around her, creating a cocoon of relative quiet. She picked up the Glock, surprised again by its weight. Following the loading procedure she had just witnessed, she inserted the magazine until it clicked, then pulled the slide back and released it to chamber the first round. Despite the earmuffs, the first shots from the other lanes made her jump. She watched as the others began firing, some with confidence, others with visible nervousness. Jack's shots came in a steady rhythm, each one hitting near the center of his target. May turned to her own target, raised the gun with both hands, and aligned the sights as Doug had explained. She took a breath, let it halfway out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The recoil, even though she'd been warned, caught her by surprise. The gun jumped in her hands and her shot went high above the target, hitting the back wall. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, though no one seemed to have noticed her miss. She repositioned herself, remembering Ray's advice about the slight bend in her elbows. This time she gripped the gun more firmly. Her second shot hit the very edge of the paper. Better, but still nowhere near where she was aiming. By her fifth shot, May had adjusted to the recoil and managed to hit within the outer rings of the target. She concentrated intensely, shutting out the sounds of the other shooters. Each time she fired, she noted what she did right and what felt wrong, making mental adjustments for the next attempt. Halfway through her box of ammunition, she became aware of someone watching her. Turning slightly, she saw Ray standing a few feet behind her lane, a mop in his hands. He nodded encouragingly. When May finished her 20 rounds, her target showed a scattered pattern across the right side of the paper, with no shots near the bullseye. She set the gun down, pointing downrange as instructed, and removed her earmuffs. The sound of continued shooting filled her ears. Looking down the line, she saw that most people were still firing. Jack had already finished and was now standing beside Doug, both of them watching another student's technique. Not bad for a first time. Ray's voice came from behind her. May turned. I didn't hit the center once. Didn't expect you would. Ray stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're consistently to the right, see? That tells us something. That I'm a terrible shot. Ray chuckled. That you're anticipating the recoil. Pushing the gun slightly right as you pull the trigger. Common beginner mistake. He glanced toward Doug, who was now engaged in conversation with Jack and showed no signs of coming to check on May's progress. Try this, Ray continued, setting down his mop. Next round, focus on keeping your wrist straight. Don't let it bend as you pull the trigger. He demonstrated with his hands. And slow down your breath even more. Fire between heartbeats if you can feel them. May looked at him curiously. Between heartbeats? More stable that way. Old sniper trick. Before she could ask more questions, Doug's voice boomed out. Cease fire, everyone. Guns down, pointing downrange. Ray stepped back, picking up his mop again. Just try it, he whispered before moving away to continue his cleaning duties. Doug walked down the line, checking each shooter's target and offering brief comments. When he reached lane 5, he spent several minutes discussing technique with the man there. May waited patiently for her turn, ready with questions about her grip and sight alignment. But when Doug finally glanced at her target, he merely nodded. Keep practicing, he said, already turning away. Everyone, take a 10-minute break, then we'll do another round. During the break, May stood to the side, watching as the others chatted in small groups. Jack was showing something on his phone to several classmates who responded with impressed murmurs. No one approached May or seemed to notice her standing alone. She used the time to jot down notes about her first shooting experience, documenting the feel of the recoil and Ray's advice. When Doug called them back to their lanes, she felt more prepared. For the second round, May concentrated on keeping her wrist firm and trying to feel the rhythm of her heartbeat. Breathe in, breathe halfway out. Pause between beats, squeeze gently. Her first shot hit within the inner rings of the target, much closer to center than any of her previous attempts. A small smile formed on her lips behind her safety glasses. She continued, focusing intently on each shot. By the end of the second box of ammunition, her grouping had tightened considerably, though still not near Jack's precise center hits. When class ended, Doug announced that they would begin working on drawing from holsters the following week. Practice your grip and stance at home, he advised. Dry firing is fine as long as you triple-check that your weapon is unloaded. As people began to leave, May lingered, carefully studying her target from the second round. The improvement was clear, but she still had so far to go. Quite a difference, Ray said, appearing beside her with his broom. Thanks to your advice, May replied. How did you learn so much about shooting? Ray shrugged. Vietnam. Long time ago. Then 20 years at the county sheriff's office. You were a deputy? Evidence technician. But I spent plenty of time at the range. He nodded toward her target. You've got good focus. Most people, their minds wander between shots. Not you. May felt a small glow of pride at the compliment. I have a lot to learn. We all do. Ray glanced toward the door where Jack was leaving, surrounded by admirers. Some just don't know it yet. As May drove home, she felt a new sense of determination. The library had always been her world. Quiet, orderly, predictable. The shooting range was different. Loud, challenging, intimidating, but for the first time since Tom died, she felt a spark of something she hadn't expected. Not just determination, but excitement. That night she practiced her stance again, this time with a better understanding of what she was trying to achieve. Between heartbeats. She whispered to herself, feeling for the rhythm in her chest as she extended her arms toward the mirror. 2 weeks had passed since May's first time firing a gun. The class had settled into a rhythm now, safety lectures in the classroom followed by practical exercises on the range. Doug still spent most of his time with Jack and the more promising students, but May didn't mind as much anymore. She had found her own teacher in Ray. After the third class, Ray had approached her in the parking lot. If you want, he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes, I could give you some pointers after hours. I stay late on Tuesdays to do the deep cleaning when the range is closed. May had accepted immediately. The next Tuesday, she'd return to Blue Ridge after work. Ray was waiting by the door, keys in hand. For an hour, he'd worked with her on stance and grip, using one of the range's training pistols. No actual shooting, just the fundamentals that made all the difference. It became their routine. Every Tuesday evening, May would arrive at 7:30, and Ray would help her refine her technique. Sometimes they would talk while she practiced dry firing, Ray sharing stories from his time in Vietnam or his years working for the sheriff. May telling him about interesting books that had come through the library or memories of Tom. You've got librarian hands, Ray told her during their third Tuesday session, watching as she broke down the Glock for cleaning. Steady, patient, good with details. Now it was Saturday morning again, the 5th week of class. May arrived early, as had become her habit. The range was quieter than usual. A few regulars in the public section, but none of her classmates had arrived yet. She took the opportunity to look at the bulletin board near the entrance, which displayed flyers for upcoming competitions and special events. Morning. May. It was the woman from the front desk, whose name May had learned was Diane. "You're here bright and early." "Just wanted to get a head start," May replied. "You've been coming for Tuesday practices, right?" Ray mentioned it. Diane smiled. "That old grouch doesn't usually take an interest in the students." May felt oddly protective. "He's been very helpful." "Oh, I know. He's a good egg. Just keeps to himself mostly." Diane looked up as the door opened and several students walked in. "Looks like your class is starting to arrive. Doug said you'll be doing timed drills today." May thanked her for the information and headed to the classroom. Timed drills sounded intimidating. She found her usual seat and took out her notebook, flipping through the pages of notes she'd accumulated. In the margins were little sketches she'd made to help her remember proper form. Hands positioned just so, feet at the right angle, shoulders relaxed. The classroom filled quickly. Jack arrived with his usual entourage, looking relaxed and confident. He caught May's eye and to her surprise nodded in acknowledgement. It was the first time he'd shown any sign of recognizing her existence. Doug strode in exactly on time, carrying a stopwatch and a clipboard. "Morning, everyone. Today we're stepping things up. Timed shooting drills." He looked around the room. "By now you should all be comfortable with basic marksmanship. Today we'll add pressure. In real-world situations, you rarely have the luxury of taking your sweet time." He explained the drill. Each student would fire 5 rounds at a target, reload, then fire 5 more. The entire sequence would be timed. "This isn't just about speed," Doug cautioned. "Accuracy matters more. A fast miss is still a miss." When they moved to the range, May noticed that the lane assignments had been changed. Her name was on the board next to lane 4, closer to the center than she'd been before. She wondered if it was a mistake. As if reading her thoughts, Doug announced, "I've mixed up the lanes today. Everyone needs experience shooting in different positions." May set up her station, organizing her ammunition and eye protection methodically. To her left was a man named Paul who had shown steady improvement over the weeks. To her right was one of the women who had come together on the first day. May thought her name was Lisa, though they'd never actually spoken. Doug started with lane 1, where a nervous-looking older man fumbled through the drill, dropping his magazine during the reload. Next was Jack, who performed smoothly, hitting the center rings with all 10 shots and completing the drill in record time. Doug clapped him on the shoulder approvingly. "That's how it's done, folks," Doug announced to the class. "Notice how Jack maintains his focus throughout the reload. No wasted motion." The drills continued down the line. Some students did well. Others struggled with the added pressure of being timed. May watched each performance carefully, noting what worked and what didn't. When it was her turn, May put on her earmuffs and safety glasses, took a deep breath, and picked up the Glock. She could feel eyes on her, not everyone. But a few students were watching curiously. She hadn't shot in front of most of them before, always being tucked away in the far lane. "Ready?" Doug asked, stopwatch in hand. May nodded. "Begin." May raised the gun, focusing on the target. Between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The shot hit just right of center. She fired again, adjusting slightly. Closer to center. 3 more shots, each one deliberate but fluid. She dropped the empty magazine, inserted the loaded one, and chambered a round, her movements precise from hours of practice. 5 more shots, each one hitting within the inner rings. She set the gun down, pointing downrange, and removed her earmuffs. There was a moment of silence. Doug checked his stopwatch. 43 seconds, he announced. "Good accuracy, but you'll need to work on your speed." The reload was clean, though. Coming from Doug, this was high praise. May felt a warm glow of satisfaction. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ray standing in the doorway of the range, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. As the class continued, May became aware of subtle changes in how others regarded her. Lisa actually spoke to her during the break, asking about her grip technique. Paul nodded respectfully when she returned to her lane. Even Jack gave her a thoughtful look when he thought she wasn't watching. After class, Doug asked everyone to gather around for an announcement. In 3 weeks, we'll be holding the end-of-course competition, he said. It's optional, but I encourage everyone to participate. There will be 3 categories: accuracy, speed, and distance. You can enter any or all of them. Winners get a free month of range time and some bragging rights. He grinned. The overall champion gets this. He held up a silver belt buckle with the Blue Ridge logo engraved on it. It's tradition. Our top shooter earns the buckle. As people began to disperse, discussing the competition excitedly, May lingered behind. She hadn't considered competing. The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety. You should enter, Ray said, appearing at her elbow with his broom. I don't think so, May replied. I'm not ready for that. Ready as you'll ever be. Besides, it's good experience. May shook her head. I'd be embarrassed. Ray leaned on his broom, studying her with those pale blue eyes. Can I show you something? He led her to a display case near the front desk that May had walked past many times without really looking at it. Inside were trophies and photographs from various competitions over the years. Ray pointed to a faded photo from the 1980s, showing a much younger version of himself accepting a trophy. State champion, 1986, he said without boasting. I was nervous too. Almost didn't enter. May looked at him with new respect. I didn't know. Not something I talk about much. He tapped the glass. But I'm glad I did it. Not for the trophy. For knowing what I was capable of when it counted. On the drive home, May thought about the competition. The idea still made her nervous, but there was something appealing about testing herself. She had started this class just wanting to learn basic self-defense, to feel less vulnerable in her empty house. Somewhere along the way, it had become something more. That evening, her neighbor Judy came over for tea, as she did most Saturdays. They sat in May's kitchen, steam rising from their cups. So how's the shooting class going? Judy asked. You still haven't told me much about it. May sipped her tea, considering. It's surprising. How so? I'm actually not bad at it. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. May had never been one to boast about her abilities. She'd always been the quiet one, the reliable one. The overlooked one. Well, I'm not surprised, Judy said loyally. You've always been good at anything you set your mind to. May smiled. There's a competition coming up. Are you going to do it? I'm thinking about it. Judy raised her eyebrows. The Machen I knew 6 months ago wouldn't have even considered it. Maybe I'm not quite the same Machen anymore. Later, after Judy had gone home, May stood in front of her mirror again. She raised her hands in the familiar stance, feeling the phantom weight of the Glock. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, still quiet, still unassuming, but with a new certainty in her eyes. She thought about Jack's perfect groupings, his easy confidence. She thought about Doug's grudging approval of her reload technique. She thought about Ray's faded championship photo. The distance competition, she whispered to her reflection. I'll enter the distance competition. It would play to her strengths, patience, steadiness, precision. The others would be focused on the speed and accuracy events where Jack was sure to dominate. The distance shooting required a different kind of skill, one that May was beginning to suspect she might possess. She lowered her hands and smiled at herself. For the first time in a very long time, Mei Chen was actually looking forward to being noticed. The final weeks of the shooting class flew by faster than May expected. With the competition approaching, an air of friendly rivalry had developed among the students. Even May, who had spent most of the course being virtually invisible, now received nods of recognition and the occasional question about her technique. It was the Tuesday evening before the competition, and May was at the range for her regular practice session with Ray. She had signed up for the distance event the previous Saturday, quietly adding her name to the list while most of the class was gathered around Jack as he demonstrated his speed shooting technique. Let's try the distance targets tonight, Ray suggested, unlocking the door to the range. The familiar smell of gunpowder and metal greeted them as they entered the empty shooting area. How far will they be in the competition? May asked, setting down her bag. She had purchased her own ear protection and safety glasses 2 weeks ago, a small investment in her growing commitment. 50 yards for the final round, Ray said. That's a challenge with a handgun. Most people train for 25 yards or less. May nodded. She had been practicing at increasingly greater distances over the past weeks, but never quite that far. The trick isn't just aiming, Ray continued, setting up a target at the farthest point of the range. It's knowing exactly how the bullet will drop at that distance. At 50 yards, you need to aim slightly higher than you think. He returned to where May stood and handed her a Glock, similar to the one she'd been using in class, but with a slightly longer barrel. "This is my personal piece," he said. "Better for distance work. I cleaned it this morning." May accepted the gun carefully. "Are you sure it's okay for me to use it?" "Wouldn't offer if it wasn't." Ray gestured toward the target downrange. "Let's see what you can do." May put on her ear protection and safety glasses, then took her position. The distance was intimidating. The target looked small from this far away. She raised the gun, finding her stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, arms extended with a gentle curve at the elbows. She focused on her breathing, found her heartbeat, and waited for the moment between beats. Her first shot missed the target entirely. "Remember what I said about bullet drop," Ray called. "Aim a hair higher." May adjusted, raising her sights slightly. Her second shot clipped the edge of the target. Better, but still far from the center. She fired 3 more times, making tiny adjustments with each shot. Her 5th shot hit within the outer rings. "Good," Ray said. "Now let's talk about wind." For the next hour, Ray taught May about factors she'd never considered. How even the slight air current from the ventilation system could affect a bullet at 50 yards. How the weight of the bullet made a difference. How the smallest variation in trigger pressure could translate to inches of deviation downrange. "Most people think shooting is just about pointing and pulling a trigger," Ray said as they took a break. "It's really about physics and self-control." May sipped from her water bottle, considering his words. "Is that what made you a champion? Self-control?" Ray smiled faintly. "Partly. And I had a good teacher like you." His eyes took on a faraway look. "My dad, he was a Marine sniper in Korea, taught me to shoot when I was 12. And the physics part? That came later. In Vietnam." Ray's face clouded briefly. "When the stakes were higher. They practiced for another hour, focusing on single, precise shots rather than rapid firing. By the end of the session, May was consistently hitting within the inner rings of the target from 50 yards. Not quite bullseyes, but respectable groupings that showed steady improvement. As they packed up, Ray hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "Almost forgot. Got something for you." He handed May a small leather pouch. Inside was a brass compass, old but well-maintained, with a lid that snapped open to reveal the cardinal directions. "It was my dad's," Ray explained. "Then mine in Vietnam. Kept me oriented when everything else was chaos." "Ray, I can't take this," May protested, trying to hand it back. "Not giving it to you. Loaning it. For luck." He closed her fingers around the compass. "In shooting, knowing your direction matters. Where you're aiming, where you've been, where you're going." May felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you. I'll take good care of it. See that you do. I expect it back after you win." "You really think I can?" Ray looked at her steadily. "Wouldn't be here if I didn't." On Saturday morning, Blue Ridge Shooting Range was busier than May had ever seen it. The parking lot was full, and a banner over the entrance announced the competition. Inside, the atmosphere was festive. Diane had set up a refreshment table near the front desk, and students from other classes had come to watch. May arrived early, wearing her usual modest attire but with one addition, a blue ribbon holding back her hair. A small touch of color that had prompted Judy to remark that she looked ready for business when she left the house. Ray's compass was in her pocket, its weight reassuring against her leg. She hadn't seen Ray yet, but she knew he would be around somewhere, probably keeping to the background as he usually did. The classroom had been transformed into a staging area. A large whiteboard displayed the competition schedule and participant lists. May scanned the roster for the distance event, 6 names including hers. Jack had not entered this category, focusing instead on the speed and accuracy competitions where he was the clear favorite. Nervous? May turned to find Lisa standing beside her. Over the past few weeks, they had developed a cautious friendship, sometimes chatting during breaks or helping each other with equipment. "A little," May admitted. "You'll do fine," Lisa assured her. "I've seen you shoot. You've got the steadiest hands in the class." Before May could respond, Doug entered the room, clipboard in hand. "Attention, everyone. We're about to begin. Speed competition first, then accuracy. with distance after lunch. Competitors, please check in with me for your starting positions. The morning passed in a blur of excitement and tension. May watched the first two competitions with interest, noting Jack's dominant performances. He won the speed event easily, hitting all targets in record time. The accuracy competition was closer, with Paul giving Jack a surprising challenge. But in the end, Jack prevailed again. During lunch, the students gathered in small groups discussing the morning's events and speculating about the distance competition. May sat alone, reviewing her notes and mentally preparing herself. She saw Jack across the room, surrounded by admirers as usual, the 2 medals from his morning victories hanging around his neck. To her surprise, Jack detached himself from his group and walked over to her table. "Chen, right?" he said, sitting down across from her. May nodded. "Congratulations on your wins." "Thanks." Jack studied her for a moment. "You're in the distance competition?" "Yes." Didn't see that coming. His tone wasn't unkind, just surprised. "That's the toughest event. Most beginners avoid it." "I'm not most beginners," May replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Jack grinned. "Apparently not." "Well, good luck." He stood up. "Maybe I'll stick around to watch." After lunch, the distance competition began. The 6 participants gathered at the range where Doug explained the rules. 3 rounds, he said. 25 yards, then 35, then 50. 3 shots at each distance. Top score advances. Any questions? There were none. The competitors drew numbers for shooting order. Me got number 5. The first round at 25 yards was straightforward. All 6 shooters performed well, though 2 were eliminated for having the lowest scores. May advanced easily, her grouping tight and centered. At 35 yards, the challenge increased. May focused intensely, blocking out the murmurs of the spectators who had gathered to watch. Her shots were solid, earning her a spot in the final round against a man named David, who had been quietly consistent throughout the course. Then came the moment May had been preparing for, the 50-yard shots. David went first, taking his time with each shot. His first 2 hit within the inner rings, but his third drifted to the outer edge. A good showing, but not perfect. As May stepped up to the firing line, she was aware of the crowd behind her. More people had gathered than she expected. She caught a glimpse of Jack standing with arms crossed, watching with interest. And there, in the back corner, was Ray, his expression unreadable. May took her position, feeling the weight of the Glock in her hands. It wasn't Ray's gun. Competition rules required using the standard range weapons, but she had grown comfortable with this model over the weeks. She took a deep breath and reached into her pocket, touching the compass briefly. Not for luck, but for orientation. She knew where she was aiming. She knew where she had been. She knew where she was going. The range fell silent as May raised her gun. She tuned out everything. The spectators, the pressure, even Doug watching with his clipboard. There was only the target, her breath, and the space between heartbeats. Her first shot broke the silence. Through her scope, she saw it hit just inside the bullseye. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mia ignored them, focusing on her next shot. Same stance, same breath control, same perfect moment between beats. The second shot hit within a half-inch of the first. The murmurs grew louder. For her final shot, May made a tiny adjustment, accounting for the almost imperceptible drift she had noticed. She squeezed the trigger with gentle pressure, letting the shot surprise her as Ray had taught. The third bullet completed, a tight triangle in the center of the bullseye, a nearly perfect grouping at a distance that many experienced shooters found challenging. May lowered her gun, suddenly aware of the complete silence behind her. She turned to find everyone staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to admiration. Doug was looking from her target to his clipboard and back again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jack was the first to break the silence. He let out a low whistle, then started to clap. Others joined in, the applause growing until the range echoed with it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Doug announced, his voice carrying over the noise, "I believe we have our distance champion." As people crowded around to congratulate her, May caught Ray's eye across the room. He gave her a single nod, his face creased in a rare, full smile. She touched the compass in her pocket, feeling a sense of certainty she had never known before. She had found her direction. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Blue Ridge shooting range as competitors and spectators gathered for the final event of the day. The three category winners, Jack for speed and accuracy, May for distance, would now compete for the overall championship and the silver belt buckle that came with the title. May stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, still processing her unexpected victory in the distance competition. Several classmates had congratulated her, their surprise evident in their voices. Even Doug had seemed impressed, studying her target with raised eyebrows before officially announcing her as the winner. "Quite a showing, Ms. Chen," he had said, handing her a small trophy shaped like a target. "Didn't realize you had that kind of precision in you." Now, as Doug explained the rules for the final challenge, May felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. This was more attention than she was used to, more pressure than she had anticipated when she signed up for a basic shooting course all those weeks ago. "The championship round will test all three skills," Doug announced. "Speed, accuracy, and distance combined into one challenge." He gestured toward the range where targets had been set up at varying distances. "Competitors will start at the 20-yard line, fire 2 shots at each of 5 targets, then reload and move to the 30-yard line for 5 more targets, and finally to the 40-yard line for the last 5 targets. Scoring will be based on a combination of time and accuracy." May glanced at Jack, who stood with arms crossed, looking confident. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Despite his earlier victories, May sensed a new respect in his gaze. "We'll draw for shooting order," Doug continued, holding out a small bowl with folded slips of paper. Jack drew first, unfolding his paper. "Number 1, he announced with a smile. Some of his supporters cheered. May reached into the bowl and took the remaining paper. "Number 2, she said quietly. "Jack shoots first, then May," Doug confirmed. "Everyone else, please move to the viewing area." As the spectators filed behind the safety line, May caught sight of Ray standing near the door. He gave her a reassuring nod, then tapped his pocket where she knew he kept his own compass, identical to the one she carried. The gesture calmed her nerves slightly. Jack stepped up to the firing line, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. He looked focused, all the showmanship from earlier classes set aside now that he faced a genuine challenge. Doug stood nearby with a stopwatch. "Ready?" Doug asked. Jack nodded, settling into his stance. "Begin." Jack moved with impressive speed, his shots coming in rapid succession as he worked through the targets at the 20-yard line. His reload was smooth and quick, barely interrupting his rhythm as he moved to the 30-yard line. The difficulty increased with the distance, but Jack adjusted well, hitting all targets in the scoring rings. By the time he reached the 40-yard line, he had established a strong lead. His final 5 shots came slightly slower as he compensated for the distance, but his accuracy remained solid. When he finished, the crowd applauded enthusiastically. 1 minute, 27 seconds, Doug announced, examining the targets. With a score of 42 out of a possible 50 points. He turned to the spectators. "That's going to be hard to beat, folks." Jack stepped back from the firing line, looking satisfied. He nodded to May as she moved forward to take her turn. "Good luck," he said, and it sounded genuine. May took her position, aware of the eyes on her. She removed Ray's compass from her pocket and placed it on the small shelf in front of her, its brass case catching the light. Then she picked up her Glock, checking it methodically as Ray had taught her. "Ready?" Doug asked, his stopwatch poised. May took a deep breath, thinking of all the Tuesday evenings she had spent practicing, all the quiet hours in front of her bedroom mirror, all the patient instruction Ray had given her. She thought of Tom, who would have been proud to see her standing here facing a challenge on her own terms. "Ready?" she said. "Begin." May raised her gun and fired her first shots. She moved deliberately, not rushing but not wasting motion either. Her focus narrowed to the essential elements: stance, grip, sight alignment, breath control, trigger pressure. Each shot was intentional, each target acquired with precision. The 20-yard targets fell into a rhythm: breathe, aim, squeeze, shift. Her reload was smooth, each movement practiced dozens of times. As she moved to the 30-yard line, she heard murmurs from the crowd. She was slower than Jack, but her shots were finding their marks with consistent accuracy. At the 40-yard line, where Jack had slowed down, May maintained her steady pace. This was her territory now, the distance where she had learned to excel. Between heartbeats, she placed her shots carefully, feeling the subtle adjustments needed for the longer range. Her final shot broke the silence that had fallen over the range. She lowered her gun, the echo fading as she took a breath and turned to face Doug in the stopwatch. 2 minutes, 12 seconds, he announced, significantly slower than Jack. May felt a pang of disappointment, knowing that the time difference might be too great to overcome with accuracy alone. Doug moved forward to check her targets, counting the points methodically. The crowd waited in hushed anticipation. May caught Ray's eye again. Win or lose, she knew she had accomplished something important today. She had found a strength in herself that she hadn't known existed. Score of... Doug paused, double-checking his count, 47 out of 50. A murmur ran through the spectators. May had outscored Jack by 5 points, a significant margin at this level of competition. But was it enough to make up for the time difference? Doug consulted his clipboard, calculating the final results. The formula for the overall score had been explained earlier, a combination of time and accuracy, with penalties for missed targets and bonuses for bullseyes. Jack moved to stand beside May as they waited. "Nice shooting," he said quietly, "especially at 40 yards. I've never seen groupings that tight at that distance from a beginner." "Thank you," May replied. "Your speed was impressive." Jack shrugged. "Speed's the easy part. Precision at distance, that takes something special." Doug cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "After calculating the final scores, I can now announce the overall champion of this year's Blue Ridge shooting range competition." The room fell silent. May felt her heart beating in her chest, not from nervousness now, but from a strange sense of calm. Whatever the outcome, she had proven herself to the class, to Ray, and most importantly to herself. By a margin of 2 points, Doug continued. "Our champion is..." He paused for dramatic effect, looking between Jack and May Chen. For a moment, May thought she had misheard, but then the crowd erupted in applause, and Jack was extending his hand to congratulate her, and Doug was holding out the silver belt buckle with the Blue Ridge logo gleaming in the afternoon light. "Consistency and precision win the day," Doug said, as he presented her with the buckle, an impressive performance from someone who surprised us all. As the crowd gathered around to congratulate her, May felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Ray standing there, a proud smile creasing his weathered face. "Knew you could do it," he said simply. May reached into her pocket and pulled out his compass, holding it out to him. "I kept my promise. I'm returning it." Ray shook his head. "Keep it. Suits you better now?" He nodded toward the trophy in her hand. "You found your direction just fine." Later, as the crowd began to disperse and people started heading home, May found herself standing with Jack near the front desk. The initial excitement had died down, leaving a comfortable sense of accomplishment in its wake. "So what's next for the champion?" Jack asked. "Thinking of joining the competitive circuit? I know some people who'd be interested in sponsoring someone with your skill." May considered the question. "I don't think so," she said after a moment. "I didn't do this to become a competitive shooter." "Then why did you?" May thought about the empty house after Tom died, the feeling of vulnerability that had driven her to sign up for the class in the first place. She thought about the quiet Tuesday evenings with Ray, learning not just about shooting but about patience and self-trust. She thought about the moment on the range today when everything else had fallen away, leaving only the perfect clarity of focus. "I needed to know I could do something difficult," she said finally, "something that scared me. And now I know." Jack nodded, seeming to understand. "Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know." He handed her a business card. "I run a security training company. Could use someone with your eye for detail." As May left the range, the silver buckle tucked safely in her purse alongside Ray's compass, she felt different than she had 8 weeks ago when she first walked through those doors. The quiet librarian who had been overlooked and underestimated hadn't disappeared. That was still who she was at heart. But now that identity contained multitudes she hadn't recognized before. Driving home, May thought about what she would tell Judy when her neighbor inevitably came over for tea later and asked about the competition. She wouldn't boast about beating the class star or winning the championship. Instead, she would talk about finding unexpected strength in herself, about the value of being underestimated, about the freedom that comes from pursuing excellence for its own sake rather than for recognition. The evening sun cast long shadows across her driveway as she parked her car. The house no longer felt empty in the same way it had before. It was still quiet, still filled with memories of Tom, but now it was also home to this new version of herself, a woman who had discovered that being overlooked could be a kind of superpower, allowing her to surprise not just others but herself. May took the compass from her purse and set it on the kitchen counter, where the last rays of sunlight made the brass case glow warmly. Whatever direction life took her next, she would face it with the same steady hands and quiet determination that had guided her through these past weeks. The woman everyone had overlooked had found her aim, and her shot had flown true.